Distance TV. This evening, we're going to be speaking about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the government's suggestion that they're thinking of lifting the lockdown and sending our kids back to school on the 1st of June. We've got three excellent leading trade union speakers this evening to talk about this. They'll speak for up to 10 or 15 minutes first, and then we'll open the floor to questions from viewers. The three trade union leaders who we have with us this evening are Steve Hedley, who is the chair of the Newham Trades Council. We've also got the newly elected General Secretary of the Bakers Union, Sarah Woolley, and the National Executive Committee member of the National Teachers Union, National Education Union, Karen Parkin. The first off, though, will be Sarah. She'll speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, as I say, and then we'll invite the other speakers to address you, and then we'll, as I say, open the floor to questions. So over to you, Sarah, to start us off this evening. You just need to unmute your mic, Sarah.
Thanks, Chris. Sorry about that. Thanks for the invitation to come and speak tonight. Look, the government plans to ease the lockdown are wholly based on the economy moving again and making profit for the friends and the donators of the Tory party without a care for the health and well-being of our class. The guidance that has been released this week around easing the lockdown is confusing, it's not legally binding, and offers some of the worst employers trade unions deal with the opportunity to say that's the guidance, that's all I'm going to do, stuff the legislation. And it's no coincidence that specific legislation such as the safety regs or the Health and Safety at Work Act aren't mentioned, because they will be next on the Tories' agenda to attack or remove them. And we need to be prepared for that as a movement, because it's dangerous. And I think this whole masquerade of ineptness by the government is a smokescreen. Not putting measures in place, causing people to fall ill and to die, is causing the public to focus on that. Trade unions are being forced to firefight issues such as dealing with the lack of PPE, forcing teachers back to work prematurely, and the daily brief of lies that we're subject to. All of this is part of their agenda to enable them to force through changes such as the disgraceful immigration bill that came about this week, hide the fact that they're having trade deals with America, and also the fact that EU negotiations are broken down due to disagreements around environmental and labour standards. And no one's talking about this or challenging it because we've got so much going on with coronavirus and everything that's come about with that. But for them, it's business as usual at the detriment of our class. And it looked like at the beginning of this, they'd kind of given us a bit of a nugget. You know, they introduced the furlough scheme and it looked really good and shiny, and they worked with the trade unions, so it was going to be fantastic. But the reality is most people have seen a drop of a fifth in their basic wages. And if you count tips or bonuses on top of that, which, you know, for many of our members, they rely on those, that fifth jumps up even more. And when you're on low pay and precarious hours, such a cut is devastating. That could mean the difference between you being able to afford to rent and eat or becoming homeless in a matter of weeks. The reality is we're going to be paying this back for decades. Unemployment is already up to 69%, according to today's Morning Star, and that's before employers are asked in August to contribute to the 80%. Many employers have already used this as an excuse to cut jobs, cut terms and conditions, and many more will going forward because they've got an open door from the government to do so. And as we know, trade unions aren't everywhere that they need to be. And they've told us that we'll be contributing more. As the money needs to be paid back, it needs to come from somewhere. My concern is that more and more people are going to be driven into poverty and die as a result of this government help. And probably more so than those that have unfortunately passed away due to COVID in the past few weeks. Over the next few years, poverty is just going to become rife if we don't step up and do anything. Just as it has done over the last decade, thanks to austerity. And let's face it, if we hadn't had a decade of austerity, we wouldn't be sitting at a death toll of 35,000 today. And the frustration is that nobody's kind of stepping up Nobody's stepping up and fighting back about this. Nobody's pointing out the fact that things are being hidden under the carpet and pushed through whilst we're focusing on coronavirus. And we need to do better on the left by working together. You know, the NEU are doing a fantastic job of standing together and fighting back and really showing the power of trade unions. It's normally RMT, but this time it's NEU. As we've done our own bit with Wetherspoons and McDonald's. But, you know, there's more to come, and it's not the end of the pandemic is not going to be the end of the crisis for our class and our members. And we've got to stick together, and we've got to stand strong, because there's going to be more attacks to us. I was on a call yesterday and we were talking about the fact that, you know, going forward, it's not just going to be transport workers that are told that they're going to be denied the right to strike. It'll be teachers. It'll be all these essential workers that have been championed through this as keeping the nation running. There's another agenda, and we need to be on top of that. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Sarah. And you're absolutely right when you talk about the endemic precarious employment across the country. And that's an absolute outrage, particularly when you consider the fact that Britain is the 5th biggest economy anywhere in the world. And so there is no justification whatsoever for anybody to be in precarious employment, for anybody to be struggling with poverty and poor housing conditions. And it really is essential, I think, as you've alluded to there, for you know, the working class, for the working class representatives and the trade union movement to come together. There's never been a more important time, it seems to me, to join a trade union. And I know the Bakers Union done some brilliant work and some fantastic recruitment in places where it's been, you know, quite difficult to actually get organised trade unions in the workplace. And with all the anti-trade union legislation which we've seen inflicted on the country, and regrettably not unpicked by the last Labour government, not sufficiently anyway, there were some modifications. And then, of course, they were intensified by the coalition when they were in government. But I think if we stand together in solidarity, then I'm sure that, you know, we will prevail in the end, because ultimately we are many and they are few. And I think it's so important that trade unions like yours, you know, reaching out into those workplaces which have been, as I said, in the past difficult to organise, to actually, you know, ensure that people do recognise the strength of their common sort of endeavour and solidarity. That solidarity is an incredibly powerful tool that will enable us ultimately to win over, if we can win enough people to the struggle. And that's one of the reasons why me and other people are looking to create a grassroots movement to sort of build that momentum, as it were, to try and bring pressure on the powers that be to ensure that, you know, everybody has a share in the fruits of the nation's success. And with a big economy like we've got, then there's no reason why people shouldn't be sharing and should be able to, you know, address the scandal of low pay and poverty and inequality in the country. Which brings me now to our next speaker, Steve Hedley, who probably needs very little introduction from me. Steve is a seasoned trade unionist, has been on the front line against the fascists, and has got the scars to prove it, literally, where he's been attacked by the fascists on the streets. And I'm somebody who was active in the Anti-Nazi League in the 1970s. And many of us thought, I'm one of them, that we had defeated the fascist scourge of the threat from the fascists in this country. But it just shows you, as Tony Benn once said, there's no final victory, just that there's no final defeat. And each generation has to fight the same battle. And Steve has been absolutely at the forefront of fighting that battle against the fascists, of fighting that battle for the working class, fighting that battle to ensure good terms and conditions for workers in the workplace. And as I say, Steve is the chair of the Newham Trades Council, and he's speaking to us in that capacity this evening. So the floor is yours now, Steve, for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I think you just need to unmute yourself, Steve. You go to the bottom of your screen, left-hand side. You should be able to unmute yourself. We can't hear you at the moment. That's it. I think we can hear you now.
Is that it?
Yeah, got you.
Okay, Chris. Well, first of all, I want to challenge. I didn't even want to start off like this, but it's just, I don't usually disagree with you, Chris, but the first thing that we have to do is get away from this notion that somehow this is a national challenge, that this is a national crisis. This is a crisis that's been created by the ruling class, by the government, who have seen the virus in China months in advance and failed to prepare for it. They failed to get enough respirators. They failed to get enough PPE, even things like gloves, washing equipment, masks. And we even had the ridiculous spectacle of people working in the National Health Service who didn't have the correct PPE. So let's get away from this. We're all in this together nonsense. We're not all in this together. We have the government still and the parliamentarians going into Parliament in very few numbers, well spaced out, where there is no possibility of catching COVID. And we have frontline workers, working class people in supermarkets, in shops, in transport industry, who have to go to work. In the NHS, they have to go to work. They haven't got a choice. They work from home. And that is why working class people, and if you look at it socioeconomically, it's working class people who have taken the brunt of this COVID crisis and will continue to do so. So let's get rid of this absolute nonsense and government propaganda. We're all somehow in this together. We're not all in this together. They've got us in it, and we're paying the price now in lives. When this crisis is over, and I think it's already been made the point from the first speaker, we're headed for a depression, not a recession, a depression. And the government have already made it clear that we are going to pay for it. There's going to be austerity on steroids. They're going to be trying to extract as much of this money that they've spent on this COVID crisis from the pockets of working class people. And we have this ridiculous spectacle on Thursday nights. And, I'll go out and clap for people who work in the NHS and key workers. But we have a ridiculous spectacle of the government saying that we should all go out and clap. But on the other hand, they're not going to give them a pay rise. They're not going to give them a pay rise. So they've had 10 years of a pay freeze, in real terms, pay cuts. And we're told that we can go out and clap for them, and that makes it all better. Well, people can't live on claps. They can't put a clap in the oven and give it to the kids. So we have to absolutely nail this lie that somehow we're all in this together. Now, I am living in Newham, which is East London, the London Borough of Newham, and I'm the chair of the Trades Council here. And this is the worst affected area for COVID. And it doesn't take a genius to work out why it's the worst affected area. Have a walk around Newham, and you'll see that there's overcrowding, there's a lack of council housing, people are being squashed into accommodation, there's poverty, people are often unemployed or in very casual jobs where they've got 0 hours contracts and no guaranteed income. So we have absolute poverty here, and that's why we have the highest death rate and infection rate in the whole of Britain here in Newham. And on top of that, and I'm a member of the Labour Party, Chris, I don't know for how much longer, but I am a member at the minute. And we have a situation where the Labour Council have made millions, hundreds of millions of pounds in cuts over the last 5 years. And over £40 million this year has been slated. And they've got reserves of £1 billion, and they're not prepared to use those reserves to tackle the COVID crisis. So we've got a government who are there, who are responsible for this. And we've got local councils under the leadership of this Keir Starmer, who's made it very, very clear from the off that the Labour Party are no longer a threat to the establishment in this country. They're no longer a threat to the elite by ruling over on everything, including letting that old has-been Blunkett turn up on TV and castigate the teachers' unions. So we have a situation now where we're getting back to where it was under Blair. We've got a neoliberal government ready to impose austerity on working class people. And we've got Her Majesty's very loyal opposition who are not even going to object to that. I mean, there's been open goals. There's been open nets for these people to score in over the past month or so, and they failed to do it. And I have to say, I feel very let down by the Labour Party. I feel let down, I have to say, Chris, or no, it's not that probably a time or a place. But Jeremy Corbyn, St. Jeremy, let you down badly. He's let the witch hunts continue in the Labour Party. And of course, what we told them from the off has proved true. All these people that were witch hunting all his allies and all the left wing in the party then came for him. Because we now know, with this report on anti-Semitism, that those people actually sabotaged the Labour Party's election campaign. No notification, no word of them getting expelled from the party. So that's the situation we're in politically. And I have to say, on a trade union front, it reminds me a bit of the social democratic movements when it came up to the First World War. We had all these socialists building the international solidarity this, international solidarity that. And then they all lined up with their own ruling classes and went to war and encouraged people to fight the battles. Well, this is what it's been like with a lot of these trade unions. If I didn't know better, I think that they were paid off with this furlough money and told, just keep your heads down. Don't complain too much. And you'll get your 80% for your members. That's the ones that are unionised. Vast majority of people down here in my borough aren't unionised. And we've had a ridiculous situation where transport workers didn't have the correct PPE, and transport unions took 3 weeks. They put out advice, which was only what the law entitles people to anyway, that if you haven't got the correct PPE, if you feel yourself in serious and imminent danger, then you're entitled not to work in those situations until it's rectified. And I have to say, we've had an absolute capitulation because in a time of crisis, see, people can say what they want. People can say what they want. And they can make as many left-wing speeches as they want. But when the crisis is upon us, where are they? Why aren't they out there telling their members not to work in unsafe conditions? Why have they bought this absolute lie and this slander that we're all in this together? I don't see Boris Johnson jumping on a bus and driving it round Newham with no visor and no face mask. I don't see, Dominic Raab, for example, up at Canning Town Station at the ticket barrier with thousands of people walking past him with no PPE. These people are responsible for this crisis, and it's about time the trade union movement stepped up. It's an opportunity for us. It's an opportunity for class politics, and it's an opportunity to nail this narrative that Boris Johnson and his government have done everything possible. We've got the highest death toll anywhere in the world per capita outside of America. What an absolute disgrace.
Absolutely.
And it's an absolute disgrace, in my opinion, that a lot of trade union leaders have been prepared to collaborate with this. And I think history will hold them to account.
No, thanks very much indeed, Stephen. You make quite a number of really pertinent points, I think, there. And you're absolutely right in terms of the dangers that might befall us after this crisis is over. And there's no justification, you know, for any notion of depression or further austerity, because as I've said on many occasions, and we'll be having Bill Mitchell, the modern monetary theory economist, will be speaking at the Festival of Resistance when the social distancing restrictions are lifted and we can get our conference to formally launch our movement off the ground. But Britain has its own sovereign currency. I've already made the point that it's the 5th biggest economy anywhere in the world. There is absolutely no justification and will be no justification for there to be any depression after this. And we absolutely have to nail that line. If it's not being nailed in Parliament by the Labour opposition, then we need to make sure we get the message out there as widely as we possibly can that we're not prepared to tolerate this. And this is totally unjustifiable. And we need to be giving people, it seems to me, the necessary arguments to arm them sufficiently with the facts so that they can challenge their parliamentarians to say this is not good enough and we're not going to tolerate that. And you also made a really good point there, Steve, about local authorities. And again, something else I've been banging on about for a few years now. And I know that local authorities are under pressure, no doubt about that, with government cutbacks, etc. But interestingly, because of legislation ironically passed by the Tories in 2012, it allows local authorities to introduce a differential council tax. In other words, a redistributive council tax budget, because they're allowed now to offer differential discounts to people in each individual borough. One of the things I've been arguing is, and many local authorities, this potentially could work, won't necessarily work in every local authority area, but I've been arguing that local authorities should use this flexibility that Eric Pickles gave to them to introduce a redistributive budget in the interim until such times we can get a change in government and review local government finance, because it's not fit for purpose. And basically the way it would work is you would ask the rich people in the borough living in the big mansions to shoulder the burden, to stop the cuts and to freeze the council tax for the vast majority. But unfortunately, no local authorities taken up the cudgels to do that. They would need to get it through a referendum, so it wouldn't be something that they would be imposing. They'd have to win the argument, but I think you could win that argument if you went to the public and said, the option is we can stop the cuts and build some growth, and we're going to ask the rich people in the borough to pay for it, and we're going to freeze the council tax for everybody else. I think you could get a positive vote for such a proposition. But regrettably, no local authorities so far done that. And what we've seen, therefore, is year on year, cuts upon cuts upon cuts. And you very eloquently outlined the situation in Newham, and that's, of course, replicated all over the country. And of course, Newham has a lot of deprivation, so it hurts particularly severely, I think, in local authority areas like the one where you live. But anyway, we'll move on now to our next speaker, Karen Parkin, who is a National Executive Committee member of the National Education Union. And of course, particularly appropriate timing, really, to have Karen on the programme, given the talk that there is about opening schools. I think it is on the 1st of June. I think there was some talk about comparing themselves to, or comparing Britain to some of the countries in the Scandinavia. I'm not sure it's Denmark, where they're claiming that they've opened the schools, but the death toll in Denmark is considerably lower than it is in Britain. I think it's something in the order of just over 500, whereas in Britain, as Steve has already pointed out, we have the highest death toll, I think, per capita anywhere in the world, perhaps barring the United States. And our death toll is a colossal, getting on for 35,000 people. And in European countries which are more comparable, places like Spain and Italy, as I understand it, Karen, then talking about keeping the schools closed until September. So it really is something where, again, I think we need to step up, because this opposition doesn't seem to be coming from the official opposition in the House of Commons. We, I think, as a movement, as a wider general public, need to say, look, this isn't right. This is putting our kids at risk. It's putting the wider general public at risk, because kids, although the arguments are that children are not as susceptible, although there's some debate about that now, but not as susceptible to COVID-19, but they can be carriers. And so they could be coming back and infecting their parents and their grandparents. And so we may see another spike, let alone the risk that it's putting the teachers in by expecting them to go back to work in such circumstances. And I saw an excellent banner with health workers in London protesting, saying, nobody goes to work to die. And clearly, it seems to me the government has an obligation to ensure that the workforce is particularly public sector workers, are kept as safe as possible. And I think this is potentially a reckless move if the government force it. But let's hear from Karen anyway and see what she's got to say about the situation, and anything else you might want to say, Karen. So over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for inviting me this evening. For people who may not know, the NEU, the National Education Union, was born of an amalgamation between the NUT, the National Union of Teachers, and ATL, going back about 2 years now. We amalgamated to form what is now the biggest education union in Europe. And we have members in all sectors of education now, including support staff. So when people talk about teachers, we must include the support staff as well, and that means teaching assistants, all on-site staff, admin, and of course in the word teachers we include leadership, head teachers as well. So we're an all-encompassing education union, and over the last few weeks, we've had thousands and thousands of new members join us, which is absolutely fantastic. This has been a real mobilisation for people, for workers. We've had loads more engagement at grassroots level. We've had what we're calling COVID reps who've stood up to become reps in their workplaces and volunteered. We hope that'll continue after the crisis has passed, whenever that may be. So yeah, I must be clear, it's not just teachers that we represent, but all who work in education. Sarah's right, the going back to school sudden shock announcement last Sunday after weeks and weeks of lockdown was a shock probably to you and a shock to us. The government didn't have the courtesy to even tell our Joint General Secretaries that was about to happen and be announced. Sending again schools into absolute panic over what would happen and what could happen. And we immediately had to reject June 1st as a date. It's an arbitrary date. They've probably picked it because it's after what would have been half term for many. But we rejected it. It's simply too soon. This is a push to get people back to work, and people need schools to take care of their children. But it's too soon. We want to get back to work. I must make that clear. We want to go back to the job that we love, and the privilege that it is to educate your children. We want them back safe in school. We want them learning. Make no doubt, have no doubts about that we don't want to get back to work. But we owe it to ourselves, to our members, to our children and our wider school communities to make sure that it's safe to do so. And I'm afraid this government doesn't have a very good track record on what is the truth. As you say, Chris, comparing us to Denmark is not a helpful comparison at all. And we just don't compare to them. So that's not useful. So yeah, the government's agenda is not about getting children back to their education. It's about getting people back to work, and I do believe that. Of course, the economy needs to get going, but at what cost? Too many health workers have died already. Too many education staff have died already, and we're now in the north, we're still experiencing high numbers of the infection rate and death. London may well have slowed down, but what about the north? It's different here. We don't feel that the numbers are down sufficiently enough. So what the National Education Union has said, in line with the government's own 5 tests for returning to a wider opening of schools, we've introduced our own 5 tests, and I'll outline those in a minute. I must just make the point that we're talking about a wider reopening of schools. Schools have never closed.
No.
I'm in Wigan. I'm the Joint District Secretary for Wigan Borough, and all of our schools have been open in some shape or form, all our schools and settings, to the most vulnerable children. And that's never stopped. I've been in school myself. I'm a primary school teacher. We've operated a rota system. It's worked extremely well. We've had very few numbers of children in over the past few weeks. So we're talking about a wider reopening of schools. Similarly, teachers have been at work. We've either been in school and support staff, or we've been online, providing online learning for children, distance learning. We've been in constant contact with our children, with our families, with our communities. We're very much, as educators, we are very much a part of our communities, and that's really come to the fore in the past few weeks. So, not that you would read the Daily Mail, but please don't listen to the rumours that it's about not wanting to get back to work, or that we're lazy, that old popular abuse that educators have suffered this week. From some, not all, I have to say. The audacity of the government that changed the narrative this week from, you know, we're worried about the vulnerable children. They're suddenly worried that children are missing out on the best education that they can possibly have. That's the sheer audacity of that after 10 years of Tory austerity, when they've systematically and consistently underfunded schools. And we've been fighting this for the last 10 years. Drastic underfunding. We've lost teaching assistants, we've lost teachers, we're working with fewer resources, like in a lot of other sectors, do more with less. And then Gavin Williamson attempts at the weekend to pull on our heartstrings, and we have to look to our responsibilities. How insulting, how absolutely insulting, how dare they? How dare they accuse us of not wanting the very best for our most vulnerable children? We see it every day. We work with it every day. We care for those children every day. This is not about staff not wanting or can't be bothered to go back to work. But interesting that they've changed that narrative now to somehow, you know, it's the teachers, it's the militant left, the militant educators that are denying our children all the possibilities that they could have. A few weeks in school at the end of the summer term ain't going to undo 10 years of massive cuts to education. It really isn't. So it's galling to hear them play that card. You know, this is not a game, it's a low blow. That how dare they suggest that all our children are not absolutely top of our list, because they are. So we have five tests for the government. They're very simple. We've been very clear. We've also produced joint union advice about what we're asking for before the schools open to more pupils, and we're not asking for the world. Test 1, much lower numbers of the COVID-19 cases, and I've already mentioned, you know, geographically it's not the same in every area, so maybe there should be some scope for different openings in different parts of the country, different opening phases. Test 2, a national plan for social distancing. We're just getting the hang of this when we go to the shops as adults. We're just beginning to get the hang of it after 8 weeks. Social distancing is gonna, I'm not saying it's impossible for children, it's pretty impossible at the moment, particularly for the youngest children, who, you know, you can tell them, and you can get out the meter stick and lay it on the floor and say, this is what 1 meter looks like, 2 meters, and they understand and they get it, and you know, they'll try. But when you're working with 3-year-olds, it doesn't last very long. So we need a national plan for social distancing. We need to get used to it. Children need to get used to it. We need a clear plan for how it's going to work in society, and particularly in schools, which we don't want to become incubators for this horrific virus. Test 3, testing, absolute testing for people who show symptoms, and testing at easily accessible sites. We've been promised testing, but our nearest site is 7 miles away at the moment. Lots of families don't have access to cars. We're not particularly keen on using public transport either at the moment. So how is this testing going to work? How is it going to be available? When do you get the results? You know, the whole system of the track and tracing needs to be in place. We need school strategies for what we'll do in response to outbreaks when they occur, not if they occur, when they occur. And protection for the vulnerable. What protection will there be in place for our families? An awful lot of grandparents have childcare responsibilities. People are going to be forced back into doing that when they go back to work. They probably already are. So while they may have been shielded or self-isolated over the past few weeks, as more and more people are forced back to work, they're going to have no choice. So it's very often it's the grandparents that pick up children from school at 3:30. So what's going to be in place for them? There's a whole new way of working here that's got to be embedded for the children and for the adults. I've been teaching for 30 years now. I feel like I've almost got to retrain as a teacher, because I don't know how this is going to work. We've begun to make some plans, and yes, we have asked our members to engage with leaders of schools to make plans for the time when it's right, for safe plans, for it to be safe for people to go back to work. So we want it to be safe. We want the evidence. We've written to the government 4 times now, asking them for the evidence that it's safe to go back into the workplace. We're getting either obfuscation or lies or dodging, really. They won't give us some solid hard evidence, scientific evidence that it's going to be safe. Or they're saying, well, we can't make 100% guarantees, but maybe we'd settle for less than 100% guarantees, but certainly more than we've got at the moment. I don't know what date I would suggest for going back to school. I know that now is too soon, and June the 1st, already a lot of local councils have said they're not going to do that. Not all, but a lot have said they're not going to do that. We're looking at June 8th, some have said June 15th. At the moment, though, these feel like pretty arbitrary dates. We don't feel ready. We don't feel we've had the evidence. We don't feel the tests have been met. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. It feels very, very sudden. And then, of course, there's the summer break. I don't see the point of opening schools for a couple of weeks. Risk a spike in infection because we don't know how easily children transmit the virus. We don't know really how susceptible they are. There's a terrible case in the papers this week over in Yorkshire. A little girl had the COVID virus. She's 5 years old. I don't know if you saw the picture of her lying in a hospital bed. It was horrific. She'd had the virus, it went, and then she got this awful Kawasaki syndrome that affects children's, makes their hands and feet go red. Horrific. She was in intensive care. I believe she's out now, but we just don't know. We just don't know what risk our children are at. We just don't know what risk our staff are at. We just don't know what risk our parents and carers and grandparents are at. And until we do, we're just asking that it's safe. I don't think that's too much to ask. I wonder if this is the herd immunity that the government were talking about a few weeks ago, that they flatly denied, because I don't know how there can't be a big spike in infection rates if we send all our little people back into those incubators of the virus in a couple of weeks' time. I don't see how we can avoid a spike.
Well, the first obligation of the government is to protect its citizens, isn't it? And clearly they're falling down on the job, it seems to me. And it's so important, therefore, I think that you and the NEU and others, that we call them to account, and that we speak out and demand that they live up to their obligations, as it were. And I say if we can raise our voices loud enough, then I think we can force them to listen. Sorry, Karen, I was going to say we'll probably need to go to some questions from the audience. If you could just conclude your comments now, if that's okay.
I will conclude. We do have power, and you as parents have power. Make your voices heard. Do you want your kids to go to school? And hopefully a link will appear to the petition. Anyone can sign it. You don't have to be an educator to demand that the government open schools only when it's safe. 400,000 people, I think, have signed it so far. There is a very strong public feeling against this government plan to reopen schools too soon. But parents have the power. So please support the National Education Union in this. We're trying to keep your children safe. So please sign our petition.
We'll make sure that we send a link out when we publish this broadcast, which is going out live now, and we'll send a link out to everybody who's not been able to watch it live, and we'll include a link to the petition, and hopefully we can build that and as I say, get that momentum sufficient that we force the government to listen to common sense. Let me just go to some of the questions though, because we've got quite a few questions coming in. There's a couple of questions, if I could just start with, from first of all from Lynn Gunnigal and then Oliver Martin. They're linked. Lynn says, public expectation is so low. How can we encourage the workers and the public in general to expect and receive better from the government? And Oliver Martin says, how do we go about giving trade unions their teeth back to fight for the workers when governments don't seem interested? Many don't join unions due to them believing they lack clout. What would you say to that, Sarah? You have to unmute yourself.
I think we've done a lot of work around that with the McStrike campaign and the Wetherspoons campaign. Trade unions aren't a third party. The members are the trade union. And going back to what Karen mentioned earlier about the Daily Mail attacking the NEU, talking about the trade unions stopping teachers from going into work. Trade unions are their members. They are the people that come together, that stand together in their workplace, that fight back and that say no. And, you've got examples of groups of people, groups of young people that have stood together, that have forced change in McDonald's, that have forced a U-turn with Tim Martin that wasn't going to pay any furlough, and then decided to U-turn it after the pressure that they created. It wasn't us as the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union officials doing that. It was our members. And I think looking at the fact that NEU have had such an increase in membership because people recognise the need to do more in their workplace, that then should empower more people. We're forcing change. We've got a hell of a lot of work to do as a trade union movement to get wider out there and for more people to understand the relevance. But as Steve mentioned earlier, we've got an opportunity, and we've got to grasp that opportunity. We are the only body that's fighting back, and we are the only body that are protecting our members in the workplace. But we need people to be in them.
Any comments on that, Steve? Just before you do, there's a nice comment from Marlene Jones who says, "Well said, Steve. I'll always say that a political coup's been allowed to happen. And now we have a Sir Establishment right-winger Labour leader." And I think she just wanted to express a solidarity with your opening remarks, Steve. Any comments about those two questions as well, Steve?
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to say at this present moment in time, we've got two trade union movements in this country. We've got a movement that is there for people in ordinary terms and conditions and contracts, usually older workers. And this is a demographic time bomb. If you look at the union membership, mainly centred in 40 plus, they've got pensions, they've got some sort of terms and conditions. And then we've got the trade union movement that is coming up in the form of cleaners unions, IWGB, IWW, people like that, who are fighting for staff members who aren't haven't got those terms and conditions. And what the trade union movement, the main trade union movement, have done under the misleadership of the TUC, because they've been an absolute disgrace. It's embarrassing seeing them on TV, basically saying, well, give us a few crumbs and you'll buy off any criticism during this crisis. What we have to do as a trade union movement is renew ourselves. And we also have to be very political about this, because we need a political party that's going to fight on our behalf. And if the Labour Party aren't going to do that under Stammer, if there's going to be a Blair Mark II, which is showing all the signs of being, then we have to do that, because let's get down to the brass tacks of trade unionism. Trade unionism is a defence mechanism for the working class, because you can get a factory and you can achieve the best terms and conditions in that factory ever. All that will happen is some other factory that doesn't have those terms and conditions will come along and they will undercut you. And you're back to square one, organising people. So what we need to do is educate people that, of course, you fight for your terms and conditions, but you do that with a political view of getting rid of capitalism and putting in place a socialist form of society, a socialist society. Because we've seen one thing this crisis has actually exposed completely, is that the key workers are not those that sit in the stock market. They're not those managers that sit in offices having meetings about meetings and sitting emailing each other all day. The key workers are the people that work in shops, the working class people, who are the bus drivers, who are the tube drivers, who work on the stations. They are the key workers, obviously the NHS. So it has to be a realisation from people that we have to renew the trade union movement and start fighting not just for economic gains, but for a socialist society.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Very, very important words there. Let me just come to Karen. Karen, there's some few questions which are specifically targeted at you. First one's from Jerry Tasker. He's saying, Karen, what is the NEU doing to link up with other unions like the RMT, TSSA, ASLIF and Unite? Their members are dying, and perhaps one should be coordinated media campaigns, action short of strike. Action short of a strike. And then there's some further questions, if I may, to you, Karen. You might want to comment on this. Why is it okay for state schools to return in June, but private schools are returning in September? And then just a couple of others, if you could perhaps just make a quick note on them. How will it affect children in their formative years being constantly told to stay away from other children? And then finally, what is the science that the government relay on to say it's safer for children now than when the lockdown started? Up on some of those, Karen.
Yes. Can I pick up on the third question first? What's the impact on children in their formative years?
Yeah.
To be told to stay away. Well, again, we don't know what the impact's going to be, but I suspect it won't be a positive impact. We've been talking today about what kind of education we want to go back to when we do go back. And the NEU's position is that it isn't the kind of education system that we've just come out of. I think there's going to have to be a whole new way of teaching and learning. And I think the most immediate priority is going to be our children and young people's mental health. They will have come out of this traumatized, many of them. It won't have been traumatizing for all children, but not all children have the same support at home as we know. Some of those children and young people will have been bereaved. They'll all have their own particular stories to tell, the unique stories of what's happened and how they've spent this unique period of time with their families. So whatever kind of learning and teaching goes on, that has got to be the absolute priority. And we need to design a curriculum going back that's going to meet the needs of those children, particularly the needs of those most vulnerable children. But all our children are going to be vulnerable to a point upon returning to school in what's going to be a very different looking and feeling environment, completely alien to what they've been used to. It's been strange enough for the children who are in school at the moment. So I don't know what the impact will be, but as parents and as educators, we've got to face that, we've got to grasp it. And going back to the regime of SATs and phonics tests and SATs practice and the narrow curriculum that we've come to see, I'm afraid, in the past few years, as a result of these high stakes tests, as a result of the pressure imposed on schools by Ofsted, which needs a serious looking at as well. If those pressures all come back to bear immediately on schools, that's setting off a ticking time bomb emotionally. So we have to look at this is one of the other things that we have to address and look at. And children's mental health has got to be the number one priority. We want a more nurturing environment than we've had previously.
It's interesting, isn't it? Well, of course, this business about the private schools not going back until September. I mean, that sort of tells you something, doesn't it? I mean,
well, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? Why is that? Why the goalpost different for people who can afford to pay tuition fees in the thousands, but for people who go to state school, who still pay, obviously, but to state school, why are the rules different? Are we some kind of guinea pigs for the system?
Seems that way.
It highlights Steve's
working with other trade unions as well, just Karen, then I'll bring in Sarah. Any thoughts about that? Has any of you given any thought to that?
Absolutely. We produced some joint union advice with some of our sister unions in education. In Wigan, I know we've been working closely on a weekly basis with our local council and other trade unions from Unite, GMB, for example. So we have worked for the past 7 or 8 weeks. Personally, we've done that. But yes, it absolutely is a trade union movement. We've all got to come together on this, every single one of us, because if we ain't going to do it, who is?
Well, no, a good point. Sarah, you was just trying to come in there.
Yeah, all I was going to say was it highlights Steve's point. You know, we're not in it all together. The private schools of the rich and the wealthy that can afford to send the kids there are being treated and being kind of shielded from this, if you like, whereas everybody else that can't afford to do that, our class, are kind of being thrown to the wolves, aren't they? You know, go back and see what happens, and it just further clarifies the divisions that are there in society.
Yeah, no, indeed, and there's a whole lot of questions coming in now, and John Dunn, a good comrade of mine, and he's saying it's great to see real trade unionists and class fighters leading the way, and he's sending his solidarity. But we just got one here from Faraz Khan. He's saying, will private schools have tracing and testing? I don't know if you know that one, Karen, if that's something that you can answer. And there's also a general question to all three of you, actually. Apparently we're getting a lot of comments coming in, people saying, what about a general strike? I don't know whether that's something you'd want to comment on. Steve, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, on the subject of a general strike, I'm all for calling for a general strike, Chris. And of course, you know, we should call on the TUC. They organise a general strike, but we shouldn't expect the TUC to do it. It's like calling on God to make you win the lottery or something like that. You might want to do it, but you know it's not really going to happen. So what you have to do then is not just be prepared, as a lot of the left seem to do, to be posturing and go, yeah, look, the TUC are crap. We all know the TUC are crap. We know they're not going to organise a general strike. But your responsibility doesn't end there. Your responsibility has to be with the unions that are prepared to take action. And if those unions aren't prepared to take action, if they're not prepared to have a coalition of unions that are prepared to fight, if they're not prepared to fight, then rank and file members have to take things into their own hands. We cannot allow this government to tighten down on the anti-union laws anymore. We've got a situation now, we've got the most restrictive union laws in Europe. We're about to be hit with another barrage. And I have to say that those trade union leaders, they're sucking up to the government at the minute for their 80% COVID payment. And somehow thinking that they're going to, you know, if they be good boys and girls, they're not going to be hit with this barrage of anti-union legislation, which will make people make their own strikes. That's at the heart of it. They're going to be sorely disappointed. Because like the right wing always does, they'll say, thank you very much for your cooperation. Maybe we'll wake one or two of you lords, but we'll hammer the rest of the working class. So there really is a responsibility on the activists to get off Facebook, to get off social media, go and organise their workplace and organise walkouts if that's what it takes.
Yeah. Well, any thoughts on that, Sarah? I mean, you're General Secretary of the Bakers Union. Any thoughts about whether there should be industrial action if there's a feeling that the government lifts the lockdown too soon and potentially puts workers in harm's way as a response from the trade union movement? Is that something that you think might fly? What's your thoughts?
I think it's something that, you know, like Steve says, the members and the activists need to lead. It's not for me as a General Secretary to tell people what to do. I would encourage them to, you know, to stand up and say we're not going back. The majority of our members have been in work throughout all of the pandemic, much like the NEU and the RMT, making food for the nation. And we have had some situations where people haven't felt safe at work, and we've had to take action to force employers to do what's right. And we wouldn't shy away from our members saying to us, we don't feel safe, we want to withdraw our labour, and we would support that wholeheartedly, because as a trade union we're there to protect our members, but it has to come from them. It's no good me saying to them you should do this, because how's that any better than any other leader that's failing in their roles?
Karen, do you have any comments on that? And it's interesting, well, just while you're thinking about that, we've just had somebody's making a point really that a week after the French sent the kids back to school, they've now had to close many of those schools because there's been another spike, and I think you made that point in your opening remarks. But so the kind of light of experience seems to suggest that a premature return to work is incredibly dangerous. And on that basis, is that something, do you think there's an appetite within the teaching union to talk about industrial action if the government don't listen to reason and sense? I see the BMA came out in support of the British Medical Association came out in support of the teachers in regards to their concerns about a premature return to work. Any thoughts about that, Sarah? Just in terms of the industrial action, whether that's something that should be looked at in response?
Well, I can certainly say we don't rule it out. It's a last resort, but it is the last tool in the toolbox, and if we have to use it, then so be it. But we don't want to. We feel that we have made a little bit of headway. June 1st was the date that was mooted at first. That's beginning to move back a little bit, testament to the power of trade unionism. I suggest that unless things change quickly, that should be pushed back further. And we will absolutely insist that our 5 tests are met and that our members are safe in their workplace. As everybody else has said, that's a fundamental right of a worker to be safe in the workplace, and there are laws to protect that. And if we have to advise our members of those legal rights, which may include a ballot for industrial action, then we would do that.
Are you getting much support from any Labour MPs at the moment, if not the leader, in regards to your struggle on this issue at all, Karen?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I missed a little bit.
I'm just wondering, are you getting much support from any Labour MPs or any other MPs for that matter in regards to your discussions with the government about a premature return to work? I know the Labour leadership have not been particularly forthcoming on this issue, but I wonder whether or not you're getting any support from other Labour members of Parliament or other parliamentarians from other political parties in the House.
Yes, we are. We're not politically affiliated to any party. We want to be able to work with any governing party. But I will say that Rebecca Long-Bailey has stood our corner in Parliament, and she has asked some very difficult questions of the government. She's listened to education staff very clearly, and she's as concerned as we are. Layla Moran also asked the difficult questions in Parliament. She understands our concerns. We're grateful to her. I know that Richard Bergen, Labour MP, is behind us as well. Those are the 3 off the top of my head. My own Conservative MP hasn't been as cooperative.
I'm not surprised about that, of course, but there we are. Just perhaps finish if I can, because we're virtually out of time now. It's gone very, very quickly, and thank you to our 3 guest speakers this evening. It's just from Mandy Clare. She's saying that her council's providing heads with risk assessment, so basically putting the ball back in their court, and she says that they'll back them in the event, obviously, of them taking the decision that it's not safe to return. And she says good approach to work with other trade unions and so on in this struggle. But I just want to thank our 3 guest speakers. Obviously, we could go on for a lot longer, but our program just lasts for an hour. So my deepest grateful thanks to Karen, to Sarah, and to Steve for their contributions this evening. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in, and particularly those of you who put questions. My apologies that we've not been able to get around to everybody's question, but it just shows that this programme is gaining in popularity. And hopefully you'll tune in next week. We've got a regular slot now on a Wednesday at 7 p.m. So look out for you then. Thanks for watching and good night.
Bye, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Are we off air now? Just waiting on Paul to tell us we're off air.